front door banged in my face and Madison's voice cut through the cold air. "We think it's better if you don't come in this year." My trunk was full of wrapped presents, toys, clothes, gadgets, the kind of haul I'd spent months saving for. I stood there stunned as Madison called me a cheap freeloader from the living room and my mother offered an awkward, sheepish smile. My heart hammered, humiliation and fury mixed into a hot knot. I told them I'd go, but I wasn't going to let this end quietly. I put the gifts in the back seat anyway because even angry, I couldn't let the kids go without. I knocked once more and pushed the door open. Madison, my sister, sat on the couch like she owned the whole room, arms crossed, and Ryan, my brother-in-law, avoided my eyes like he was waiting for the storm to pass. My mother hovered behind her, small and unsure, while my father stayed in his usual corner of silence. I held the wrapped pile like a confession and said, "What is this, really?" "You really think I'm freeloading?" Madison launched into it with that sharp edge she gets when she's ready to be cruel. "You walk around pretending you don't have money. You drive a new truck, you always have cash when it's convenient, and when we need help you vanish unless it's for presents. Enough." She threw the word enough like a verdict and didn't even try to meet my eyes. My mother, who usually loves me too loudly, looked away and offered nothing. My father's hands were folded like he wished he could disappear. I fought to keep my voice steady because my breath felt thin and foreign. "The truck is financed," I said. "You know how loans work. I've covered daycare bills and helped with their deposit when you bought the place. I've never asked for praise, I just wanted Christmas to be something for the kids." I could feel the words coming out too fast, the kind of talk that happens when your chest is on fire and your mouth is trying to put it out. Madison interrupted me with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "You always make it about you. We pay our bills, we manage. You don't get to play the hero and then lecture us when we call you on it." She pointed at my wrapped boxes like they were proof of my fraud. "These are for show, you wanted to look good." Her voice was cold as a slab of meat, and she meant each cut. I remember thinking how small the room felt, like the walls were leaning in to watch me fail. I told her, "I'm not here for show. I'm here because I love my nieces and nephew." I said the words, and they sounded truer than anything I'd said in a long time. She rolled her eyes, and my mother mouthed something that maybe was an apology, maybe was a shrug. Finally, I lost it in a way that surprised me. I pushed the trunk open and set the piles down on the coffee table with more force than the gifts deserved. I said, "You all have used me for years. I'm tired of being the backup for every screw-up. You want money, fine, but you don't get to make me feel like dirt while you take it." The air in the house seemed to crack. Ryan stood up as if to stop me, but then he sank back down, caught between the man he was and the husband he wanted to be. Madison got right in my face and hissed, "So now what? You'll punish us by being mean? You'll abandon the kids because you can't be the saint anymore?" Her words were venom, but there was something else under them, fear maybe, or guilt, and it hit me like a second blow. I felt the humiliation again, that hot knot tightening, but underneath it something colder set in. I said, "I'm not abandoning the kids. I'm done being your wallet. I'll still help where it matters for them, not for your shopping sprees or your trips. I am not your ATM." My voice was quiet and it carried like a bell. The room shifted. My mother's eyes filled, but she wouldn't look at me. My father finally cleared his throat and said nothing at all. I left with the presents and the door slammed behind me. I sat in my car with the engine off and watched their house glow, festivities happening inside without me, laughter that sounded stranger than a funeral. For 20 minutes I let myself breathe and cry and think. The humiliation was a fresh wound, but beneath that wound was a decision sealing like scar tissue. If I ever wanted to keep any part of myself, I couldn't go back to being their catch-all safety net. That night I wrapped the gifts again, drove to my apartment and put them under my small, lonely tree. I told myself I'd still be there for the kids, for school stuff, emergencies, anything that kept them safe. But I would stop paying for vacations, last-minute bills, and whatever else fed Madison's habits. It felt like stepping off a cliff, but it felt like taking my hand back from people who'd been squeezing it until I bled. I remember thinking that boundaries hurt in the beginning, and sometimes they look like losing a family holiday, but they sometimes save what little self you have left. I walked back to the porch and pushed the storm door open like I had a right to be there, but the room inside told a different story. Madison, my sister, lounged on the couch, scrolling her phone with that smirk like she'd already won. She didn't even stand up when I walked in, she just looked at me and said, "You're always slacking, you know that? You haven't been giving enough to the kids lately." It landed like a punch because it was precise and meant to hurt. I set the packages down slowly and felt the floor tilt under me. Dad was in his chair, as quiet as ever, watching like he was hoping the whole thing would resolve itself without him. He muttered nothing, one of those old habits where he kept his opinions folded up and stored away. Mom, on the other hand, chimed in, and that cut the deepest. She said, "Well, maybe Madison has a point, especially with that new pickup you financed." Her voice was small and weak, but the effect was big. "You couldn't claim ignorance when your own mother questions your motives in front of the family like that." I tried to explain the truck was a long-term loan, that I didn't just have a wad of cash to throw around. I said, "It's on finance. I got it because I needed something reliable for work and life." I told them about the daycare bills I'd covered for months, the deposit I'd helped with when they bought the townhouse, the nights I'd paid for food so the kids could still eat. I said it without flourishes because the facts are heavy enough. But they'd already made their minds up. They'd chosen to see what they wanted to see. Madison rolled her eyes and flicked her thumb across the screen like my words were flies she could brush off. "We're not blind," she said. "You show up when it's convenient, you make a scene to look like you care, but paying for everything, that's not help, that's control." She used the word control like it was a weapon. It stung because I'd never thought of it that way, and still, I knew my intentions were different. I wanted my nieces and nephew to have normal things. Sorry for the quick interruption. If you're enjoying this so far, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and leave comment below. It really helps the channel grow. Alright, let's jump back into the story. I wanted to be their uncle, not their accountant. But good intentions don't always read well in front of people ready to judge. When the conversation spiraled, I tried to keep it calm because I could feel my chest starting to race and I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I told them, "I won't be your bank anymore. I'll help where the kids need it, but I'm done covering vacations, shopping binges, and everything else that isn't for them." That line landed harder than I expected. Madison laughed softly like pity and then turned it into anger. "So you're choosing your moral high ground over family," she spat. The words were sloppy with accusation and wrapped in entitlement. I left before things got worse because I knew when to step back and let the fallout happen. In the car, with the heater on to thaw my hands, I drove home with the trunk full of gifts and a furious clarity brewing. The anger was raw but useful. It sharpened my thinking. I replayed every favor I'd done, every bill I'd covered, and how it had somehow turned into proof that I was careless with money. I thought about how easy it had been for them to reduce me to an image. New truck, single, no mortgage, rather than seeing the ledger of invisible debts I'd already paid. By the time I pulled into my parking spot, the decision had settled in like winter. I would still be in the kids' lives, but on different terms. No more immediate cash for Madison's impulses. No more apologies to anyone who treated my help like a given. I rehearsed lines in my head for the next calls, practical, focused on the kids, and clean of emotion. It felt like putting a fence around something that had been open pasture for years. The anger didn't go away, but it turned from a blind burn into an instrument I could use to protect myself and the children who actually needed help. That night I wrapped the gifts again in silence and put them under my small tree. I told myself I wasn't punishing the kids, I was changing how I'd been used. I imagined sitting in their living room next Christmas handing a few presents to 3 small faces who didn't know the details. That image steadied me. It kept me from calling my mom and begging for forgiveness or marching back to the house to demand everyone bow to my truth. Instead, I sat with the hurt, let the decision harden, and prepared for the fallout that was sure to come. Sat in my driveway with the engine off and let the years unspool like a bad movie. I counted the small things first because the small things add up faster than you think. The soccer registration I paid because Madison forgot the deadline, the piano lessons I covered when Ryan lost a contract, the gas money for trips when someone's paycheck didn't land on time. Each favor had its own quiet story attached, and together they formed a ledger that wasn't on paper but lived in me. The math was brutal when I finally did it. Month after month, year after year, those small stitches had turned into a seam that held their whole life together. I remembered the vacations too because those felt like charity with postcards attached. I lent money for a beach week when their credit cards were maxed and they promised to pay me back. Twice I helped with deposits when they wanted to move somewhere nicer. I covered emergency dentist bills for one of the kids because the clinic wanted cash up front and there was no time to argue. I never asked for repayment in a ledger sense. I asked for respect or at least an honest conversation. Instead, my help became the norm. They stopped checking their accounts before they planned another splurge. They stopped telling me the truth about how tight things were. Help wrapped around them like a comforter they forgot to fold back. I thought I was generous, and I guess I was, but I also started to see the pattern for what it was: enabling. When money showed up every time there was a problem, the problem stopped being a crisis and became a habit. Ryan joked about uncle funding at family dinners like it was a compliment, but it always landed like a penknife. Madison treated surprise bills like inconveniences to be solved with someone else's funds. I had become the easy answer, the stopgap, the person people could rely on without changing anything in their lives. That was on me as much as it was on them. I had never put a boundary down, and boundaries are what make relationships fair. The thought that hit me hardest was that I'd been paying not to fix a family, but to maintain a lie. I was buying stability for an hour while enabling chaos for the next. I could see it clear as daylight. My bank account was a bandage on a wound they refused to treat. I had told myself stories about sacrifice and love to cover up the simpler fact that my generosity had become a routine transaction in their life. If love looks like a credit card with no questions, then that love was doing harm. The kids deserved more than a grown-up habit that left them vulnerable the moment I stopped answering. That night I made a decision that felt like stepping off a curb you knew led to water. No more bailing them out. No more covering vacations, paying random bills, or becoming the default rescue plan when someone overspent on a whim. I told myself I would still help for true emergencies, for stuff that directly affected the kids' safety and well-being, but not for lifestyle choices or impulsive shopping. I wanted to make the line clean so they couldn't slide back into old patterns and tell themselves someone else would always fix it. I wanted to force a wake-up call that maybe would sting, but could also teach responsibility. The choice cost me a kind of comfort that had been invisible until it was gone. I knew it would cost me family dinners and warm smiles at holidays. I knew Madison would complain, my mother would worry, and maybe Ryan would feel the pinch while he got his footing. But I couldn't be both lifeline and punching bag. Protection has to come with limits or it becomes permission. I rehearsed my words until they were short and steady. I can help with X, Y, Z for the kids. I can't cover vacations or late-night shopping bills anymore. Clear, no drama, no lectures, just a thin set of rules I could keep. Anger and relief tangled in me that night like two men fighting for the same seat. The anger wanted to storm back to the house and shout every forgotten favor into the living room. The relief let me sit with the gifts under my small tree and feel something like peace. I wrapped the presents again with hands that were steady now, not shaking from humiliation but firm from choice. I imagined handing them to three small faces who would be thrilled and unaware of the political landscape that had led to these simple toys. That thought held me steadier than any revenge would have. When I went inside my apartment and closed the door, I felt the hollow echo of a family that might not like my decision. I knew there would be calls, pleas, maybe even guilt trips. I knew some people would say I'd abandoned them. But I also knew staying the same would mean I'd be lying to myself every morning I woke up. So I made peace with the cost and set my phone to do not disturb for a while. The boundary was in place now, thin as a new scar, and I planned to keep it. I was tired of being their safety net and their punching bag, and I was finally ready to let responsibility land where it belonged. I watched the calendar pages flip and the silence stretched out like a long, empty road. The first months after I drew my line felt awkward and hollow. Christmas came and went with no cheerful chaos, no frantic calls about last-minute needs. New Year's passed like a quiet house that forgot to celebrate. It should have been peaceful, and in some ways it was, but peace tasted thin when it was bought with distance from people you thought were family. I remember New Year's Eve because it was the loneliest of nights. Midnight felt like a verdict rather than a celebration. I sat on my couch with a cheap bottle of something that was supposed to feel like company and watched a movie I barely followed. My phone sat face down on the coffee table and it never buzzed. No texts, no calls, no group thread lighting up with the usual nonsense. I kept glancing at that dark screen like it might suddenly flare to life with apologies or invitations. Nothing came. The quiet pressed on me and made my chest ache in ways anger never had. At times I surprised myself with how calm I felt. There was a small freedom in not answering every whine about money, in not being on call when someone's lack of planning created a crisis. I slept better those nights, and the small victories, buying my own groceries without guilt, turning down requests without stomach knots, built on each other. They were the kind of wins that don't show up in a photo but change how you walk through a day. I liked the steadier version of me who didn't wake up feeling like a walking courtesy. But loneliness has a way of growing teeth at odd hours. I thought about the kids a lot during those early weeks, thinking of the way their hands reached for wrapping paper and the way their small faces would light up. I told myself I wasn't punishing them, I was changing the rules so that they'd grow with boundaries instead of endless bailouts. That felt right on paper, but right doesn't always replace the old habits of warmth and routine. The house felt emptier without their goofy holiday chaos, and without being the person everyone expected to fix things. In mid-January, my phone finally did something other than stare back at me. A message popped up from Ryan. "I'm sorry about Thanksgiving." The simplicity of it hit me in a way I didn't expect. He wrote that he hadn't agreed with how Madison handled the situation and that he'd been too timid to take a stand when it mattered. That little confession was its own kind of relief and also a reminder of how long things had been allowed to slide. I read the text 3 times, each read peeling another layer of relief and pain. His words were honest and I felt the shape of a bridge being offered, but it was a narrow one and I wasn't sure I wanted to walk it the way it was built. Ryan said he wished he'd spoken up that night and that he was sorry I felt humiliated. He asked if we could talk sometime. I typed back a short message that balanced the practical and the guarded. I appreciate that, maybe we can, I need to see changes though, the kids matter most. The reply came quick with promises and a few tentative plans. It was something, and sometimes something is all you get. That apology didn't erase the bitterness of being turned away on my own porch, nor did it make up for years of being treated like an easy option. But it softened the edges the way a warm cloth softens a bruise not gone, but less raw. I let myself imagine a conversation where words would be honest and lines would be clear. I let myself hope Ryan might actually change course and start protecting his family the way they deserved. Yet even with hope, I kept my guard up. I had already decided to help the kids, not to fund Madison's choices, and I wasn't about to let a few kind words pull me back into old patterns. So I read Ryan's apology and felt the weird mix of relief and skepticism. The silence before had been a lesson in my own limits. This message felt like a test to see if anything had been learned on the other side. I put the phone down and went back to wrapping the smaller, sharper boundaries I'd set around my life. If Ryan wanted to rebuild something real, he'd need to do more than send texts. Until then, I'd protect what I could for those kids and hold fast to the line I finally drew. I opened the door and there she was, Madison's sister, standing like a storm with her hands clenched and her face red. She didn't knock. She pushed through my small entryway and didn't wait for an invitation like she had some right to barge into my life. The first thing out of her mouth was fury. "You're being childish," she said, as if cutting someone off from being their parent's backup was a playground tantrum. Her voice bounced off my walls and landed in my chest. I set my keys on the table and said, "You can't just come in here and accuse me." She laughed at that and said the kids were struggling, that bills were piling up and she needed me. "They're going without things because you've decided to play saint," she said, and her words tried to make me the villain. I could see panic underneath the anger. It made her louder. She told me she had to have the cash to cover the rent, to get the kids' school stuff, to fix a leak, to keep the routine going. She painted things in quick strokes like a person desperate to be believed. I told her straight out, "I'm not your ATM, Madison. I won't fund your lifestyle. I'll help where the kids' safety or basic needs are at stake, but I won't cover vacations or shopping sprees or every last crisis you manufacture." My voice was steady because I had practiced this in the car, in the shower, and while wrapping presents. The words had weight now. They didn't wobble like when I'd tried similar lines before. She stepped closer until the space between us was charged. "You don't get to decide that," she hissed. "You've always been the one who fixes things. The kids need stability. You're abandoning them." She looked like she could break in half and I wanted to reach out, but the part of me that had been bruised too many times kept my hands in my pockets. "I'm not abandoning the kids," I said. "I'm changing how help works. If you want things to change, you have to change how you spend. I can't keep catching you." She slammed her hand down on my kitchen counter like it would shatter. "You think I like this? You think I want to live like I'm always begging? You're the one who taught me to ask for help. Don't act like you didn't set a pattern." Her words jabbed at me, but I knew the pattern existed long before I came onto the scene. I'd never told her to overdraw her account or splurge on expensive weekends. I'd only filled the holes when they showed up. Still, she had the right to be angry. People get angry when you stop being predictable. I tried to be practical. "Show me the bills, tell me what specifically affects the kids and I'll help, but I won't fund habits anymore. I'll help set up a budget, I'll help find help programs. I'll sit down with you and map things out, but I'm done with the catch-all check." She stared at me like I'd offered her a stone. Then she spat, "You're impossible," and turned on her heel like she'd leave and never come back. She stormed out the way she'd come in, slamming my door so the frame rattled, leaving me feeling used and oddly cleaner, like someone had ripped a band-aid off a sore. I stood there listening to my own breathing and the sound of the street outside. Part of me wanted to chase after her, to tell her I'd come with her to the bank, to the landlord, to whatever office she needed. Part of me wanted to slam something and shout every favor I'd done. But I didn't. I kept my feet planted and let her leave with her anger like an armor she'd been wearing for years. For 2 days I didn't hear anything. No texts, no calls, no attempts to negotiate. I told myself that was probably for the best. Silence can be a cooling-off period. I sat with the books I'd been meaning to read, I fixed the leaky sink in my apartment, and I checked the calendar for school dates so I could plan sensible help if needed. The quiet allowed me to be practical instead of reactive, which felt like a small victory. Then on the third morning after she left, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer it because you get used to avoiding drama, but something inside told me to pick up. The screen showed a number I didn't recognize and no name, and for a second my chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt since the door was slammed in my face. I tapped accept and lifted the phone to my ear, waiting to hear who this stranger might be and what kind of trouble they were calling about. The voice on the other end was calm and precise, and she said, "This is Laura Hinn's lawyer. Is this man?" I sat down on my couch because the world shifted under me. She told me she represented Ryan's brother-in-law and that she had a folder full of bank statements, screenshots, and receipts. I asked her to hold. My hands were suddenly numb, and she waited like it was all ordinary business. That was how the rest of the afternoon started, with facts landing like blows. She read to me what I couldn't have imagined, a private account in Madison's sister name where money that I thought had been going to household bills had been redirected. The account wasn't for a savings plan or for the kids. It was being used for online shopping sprees, luxury spa weekends, and even a weekend trip with a woman named Jen. We have copies of transactions and messages, Laura said. Ryan found a mail packet with bank info and stumbled onto this. I asked her to tell me everything slowly because my mind stuttered between denial and nausea. I heard receipts being read out like evidence. A big charge at an online boutique she'd told me was a good deal for the kids. Spa bills from a hotel downtown that were labeled as self-care in the statements. Weekend getaway charges with a name I didn't know until she said it, Jen. He opened a piece of mail by accident, Laura explained, voice steady. It was a checkbook register and he noticed transfers labeled household expenses in patterns that didn't match what was actually paid. He hired me to help untangle it. Each detail landed and built a picture that hurt more than any single fact could. I remember a cold trickle of disbelief and then anger boiling under it. All the things I'd done, covering daycare, paying for emergency dental, loaning money for deposits, pitching in on utilities, were suddenly cast in a new light. Had a chunk of that money simply disappeared into Madison's private life? Had I been propping up someone's shopping habit while they called it family expense? I asked Laura to email me scanned copies. She promised she would, and then outlined the next steps like a surgeon explaining a procedure. She told me Ryan felt guilt about not seeing it sooner and shame about how long it had gone on. He'd been scared to confront Madison at first and only acted once he couldn't ignore the documents. He's trying to protect the kids, Laura said. He's also trying to understand how deep this goes. Her words were practical, but they hit me in parts that weren't practical at all. I felt foolish for not seeing the pattern and furious that my help had been used this way. I thought back to every moment I'd shown up in their house with envelopes, cash, or online transfers. I pictured bills I'd paid into accounts that maybe never saw what they were meant for. I could hear Madison's laughter at holidays, and now it sounded like the clink of coins in a jar that had never held the children's future. The thought made my chest tight until I had to breathe deep and slow. "What do you want from me?" I asked Laura, and the question was part accusation and part plea. She explained that Ryan wanted to know the full picture and to secure finances for the kids. He was moving to protect them and he needed help with relocation costs and initial expenses while he got work lined up. He didn't want this to be a family fight, Laura said, but he needed a trusted relative to help quickly. The words settled like a roadmap for action. It wasn't just about anger anymore, it was about the kids and what they needed now. I told Laura I'd do what I could to help with the kids' immediate needs. It felt different now, no longer enabling a pattern but stepping in to protect the children who had been caught in the middle. Still, there was a hollow place where trust had been. She sent me the folder by email and I stared at the screen late into the night, scrolling through transactions that matched the bills I remembered paying. Each line item chipped away at the version of my family I had believed in. By the time we hung up, plans were being sketched, paperwork, meetings, and a list of things the kids would need when they moved. Laura's tone had been efficient and cold in a way that made the facts more real, and I felt shock and resolve walking together like strangers. I sat there, phone warm in my hand, thinking of Madison's face when I'd confronted her earlier and how sure she'd been that I was the problem. The truth was a different kind of cut, cleaner but deeper, and it changed everything I thought I'd been doing for family. I called Ryan brother-in-law the minute I finished reading the emails Laura had sent, and we talked for hours in a phone call that started messy and grew steady. He sounded raw, like a man who'd been carrying too much for too long, and he admitted he'd been scared to confront Madison's sister because he didn't want to explode their kids' world without a plan. "I should have done it sooner," he said, voice cracking. "I just didn't know how." I told him the truth felt different now, painful but necessary, and he agreed that the children came first, no matter how ugly the fallout. Ryan walked me through what he'd discovered and what he wanted to do, and the whole plan made a kind of hard sense. He wanted to move the kids temporarily to his parents' house in a neighboring state where they could have a stable place to sleep, food on the table, and a calm school routine while he got legal protection in place and looked for steady work. "It's not forever," he said, quick to reassure me, "but it's where they can heal and have normal for a while." I could hear the weight of that decision in each sentence. He was trying to do the right thing and he felt small doing it. He asked if I could help cover moving costs, the truck rental, gas, a couple nights at a motel if the schedule didn't line up, and a short-term buffer for groceries until his first paycheck hit. When he said the words, something in me didn't hesitate the way it had the last few times. This time it felt clean and focused, money for the kids' safety, not to patch up poor choices. "Tell me what you need," I said. "I'll get it to you." He sighed like relief leaked out of him and started listing amounts and dates. The number sounded both large and manageable, like an emergency that could be solved if someone stepped up. We talked logistics for a long time. Ryan explained school registration and medical records he'd need, the boxes he had to pack, and how he'd covertly find a moving company so Madison wouldn't tip off any plans if she found out too early. He was careful about the timing because he knew confrontation could spiral. If I move them and there's no plan, it could make things worse, he said. I'm trying to be practical and fast. I listened and planned my part. I could wire money to a temporary account, pick up a trailer, and be there the day they left to help load boxes so the kids felt a friendly face in all the chaos. He told me he'd found a lawyer for custody and to protect the kids' funds, which made me feel less like I was walking into a fight and more like part of a team. We scheduled calls with Laura, lawyer, to sort the paperwork and to make sure anything I gave would go directly to relocation expenses and immediate needs. The clarity mattered. I didn't want the money to be another mystery that could be misused. I wanted every dollar to have a record and a purpose. Ryan appreciated that and promised to keep me updated on receipts and plans. We spoke about the kids for a long stretch, the three small lives that never asked for any of this drama. He described how their youngest loved building blocks and how the middle one had started shyly playing piano and how the oldest liked to read late into the night. He laughed once, a brittle sound, at something one of them had said about Santa, and I heard why I'd kept helping for so long. I'll be there when they need me, but this time it's to keep them safe, not to fund a fantasy, I told him. He agreed and thanked me so many times, his gratitude started to sound like guilt. By the end of the call, we had dates and dollar amounts and a plan that felt actionable. I felt steady in a way I hadn't in months, like my anger had been given a direction. I made the transfers the next morning and sent confirmations to Laura and Ryan. It felt different when the money went out this time, not a surrender but a defense. I slept that night with less of the tight, angry energy that had lived under my ribs for weeks. The kids would have a place where routine mattered and where someone would make sure their homework got done without the cost of enabling an adult's bad choices. That thought settled me more than any apology ever could. Heard the phone ring and knew before I answered it who it would be, and when Madison's sister started screaming into my ear, I could barely keep my grip on the comm I'd worked so hard to find. She exploded with accusations and venom, blaming me for moving the kids and calling me every name she could think of. You ruined everything, she yelled. You stole my family away. I could hear footsteps and slamming things in the background like a life unraveling live on speaker. I didn't match her volume. I kept my voice quiet and measured because shouting back would only put me back where I'd been part of the drama instead of apart from it. You made choices, I said plainly. You spent money meant for the household on things that weren't for the kids. Ryan found the accounts. He moved the kids to a stable place while he gets things sorted. She cut me off with another burst of anger and accusations that tried to twist the facts into a story where I was the villain and she the martyr. It was predictable, in a way that made me sad. She accused me of betrayal like I'd stabbed her in the back, and for a moment I felt the old ache of wanting to be forgiven. Then I remembered the stack of bank statements Laura, lawyer, had sent and the list of charges that matched the bills I'd covered. I told Madison, calm and cold, if you had kept household money for household needs and put the kids first instead of shopping and secret weekends, none of this would have happened. There was a silence after that, the kind that comes when a loudspeaker stops and the room realizes the noise was masking a problem. She threatened to make me pay in every way she thought she could, legal threats, social attacks, whatever flails someone throws when they feel cornered. I let her have her threats because anger needs an audience and I wasn't planning to be her audience. I kept repeating the simple line, I'm here for the kids, not for your spending. It was short and it held its ground. She hung up finally with a slammed breath and a muffled cry that might have been the beginning of something closer to grief. After the call, I sat for a long time and thought of the kids, three small lives that didn't choose any of this drama. I pictured their bedrooms, the toys, the homework, and the bright little quirks that had nothing to do with the adults' fights. Ryan had done the hard thing and moved them to stability while he rebuilt. That was the point. Someone had to choose their well-being over the convenience of ignoring a problem. I'd helped because it was a direct measure to protect innocent people, not to bail out a habit that endangered them. In the weeks that followed, Ryan began to rebuild the parts of life that had frayed. He found a steady job that paid enough to bring a slow, cautious optimism back into his voice. He enrolled the kids in a new school where the teachers already noticed how tired they were but praised their manners and curiosity. He set up a tighter budget and met with a counselor to figure out how to set boundaries with Madison going forward. He texted me photos of small things, a science project glued together, a soccer practice trophy folded into a shoebox, and his messages read like a man rediscovering a rhythm he'd almost stopped believing in. My parents, when they finally saw the documents and the receipts, apologized in a way that felt like both relief and regret. My mother called me and said she'd been blind to what was happening and that she was sorry for taking Madison's side that awful Thanksgiving. My father, who rarely spoke, admitted he'd been tired of conflict and had chosen silence over judgment. Their apologies didn't erase the past, but they did clear some of the fog that had knotted our family together in the wrong way. I accepted their words because it felt right to let forgiveness mend what could be mended, while still keeping the boundaries I'd set. I lost the easy family holiday, the kind where everyone gathered and pretended the cracks weren't there, but I gained something more solid, my dignity. I stopped being the default rescue and instead redirected my help to the kids in ways that mattered. I paid for moving vans and school supplies and helped set up a little emergency fund that Ryan controlled for their needs. Every dollar I spent now was recorded and explained. It went to food, to clothes, to the piano lessons that kept a kid's world steady. It didn't go to spa weekends or secret getaways labeled as household expenses. Some nights I still felt the sting of being left out of the laughter and the dinners. Family is complicated and loss is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just an empty chair where someone used to sit. But when I think about the kids sleeping in a safe home, going to school without fear, and having a father who's finally finding his footing, the cost feels worth it. I kept my head up because I chose a line and I stood behind it. I changed what helping looked like so the help would actually help the people who needed it most. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. And drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.